afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Policy Exchange. I'm Chris Yu. I run our digital government team here. I know many of you, so welcome back. For those I don't know, welcome. Today's event is, we titled it Innovate or Die. It's about how the internet is changing business and what government might learn from some of the leading companies that are handling the digital revolution well. This is part of a broader program of work that we're running here at Policy Exchange, looking at the future of government in the digital age. And when I was putting this together, I went on the internet and I launched my favorite web browser, and I loaded up my favorite search engine, and I typed in Innovate or Die, and a couple of things came up. One was Blockbuster, and one was Kodak. And both of these are fascinating stories, so I won't give you chapter and verse on them. But Kodak in 1975 invented the digital camera. At the time, they were doing incredibly well out of their film business, and they chose to push the film business hard and not to cannibalize that source of revenue. We sit here in 2013. We all know what happened to Kodak and what happened to digital cameras. And there's a fascinating story in there about what happens when you choose to protect your current business model rather than following what the market and what users are asking for. Blockbuster, again, a fascinating story, right? Once upon a time in the US had something like a third of the video rental market. In the UK had somewhere north of 500 stores, somewhere north of 4,000 employees. And they chose to stick with physical products for a very long time. The innovation was around the margin, so they started to sell second-hand video cassettes, but they were late off the mark on DVDs and on digital distribution. And again, we know what happened. And I guess I contrast that with some of the experiences that we've had with other companies. So when you have a look around innovation, one of the great examples that comes up is the Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing Company, which is, of course, 3M, which originally did very badly in its mining business, but got a grip on innovation. It's now running at revenues of somewhere north of $30 billion. Of course, invented the Post-it note, which has done pretty well. And one of the archetypal stories about innovation is, of course, Apple computers. Think about the situation they were in before Steve Jobs returned. Think about the story there around product innovation, what it is that consumers were after. And again, the story tells itself. Now, all of this is not to say that government should simply import lessons straight from business. We can't just clone a corporate strategy into the public sector and expect it to work. But we do think here that though government is different, it still has a duty to do better. And there are lots of things government should be learning from the way that companies are responding to the internet. So the scope for discussion today is really threefold. One, to just explore how big industries like retail and travel and other consumer-facing parts of the economy have changed over the last decade or so, and what sets the successful businesses apart. To understand for the future how the way people are using the internet might continue to change, and what this means for different organizations. And lastly, to explore a bit the big opportunities for government to learn from the way businesses are innovating using technology, data, and the web. And I'm delighted that we've got an excellent panel to discuss these topics today. So on my right is Elizabeth Linder, who is Politics and Government Specialist at Facebook. Elizabeth joined Facebook 5 years ago to build their European Politics and Government program, and is particularly interested in understanding what the changing global demand for openness and conversation is going to do to the discourse among public leaders and citizens. Andy Washington, who is Managing Director UK and Ireland at Expedia. Andy joined Expedia in 2011 after a career in travel and retailing. And the biography, Andy says that you drive fast-track scale, efficiencies, and the ultimate customer experience. So I'm very interested to hear how that's working and how that's changing. And on my left, Tom Loosemore, who is the Deputy Director at the Government Digital Service. Tom has nearly 20 years' experience leading digital strategy and transformations. He led the work on gov.uk, which many of you will be familiar with, the government digital design principles, and the government digital strategy. And the way we'll run this session is I'll have a little bit of time for each of the panelists to share some opening remarks with you. then I'll open it up to questions and conversations in the room. And we'll aim to wrap up by around about 1:45. Okay? Before I get started, just so that I understand the room, hands up if you're a Facebook user. Ready, everyone? And hands up if you've bought something on Expedia. Pretty good. And hands up if you've used gov.uk. Wow, there we are. So you're all a hit. Okay, well, without any further ado, Elizabeth.
Excellent, excellent. The question perhaps is whether you can sing the Expedia tune, which any of us who grew up in America remember those.
Oh yeah, I don't think that's come over here.
I'm sure my sister, who's in the room fresh off a plane from Boston, would remember those as well. Well, thank you for that introduction. It's a fascinating and quite a fun debate and conversation as well. For full disclosure, I feel I almost have to say at the get-go that I have not actually worked within government. I've never worked within the public sector. I started my career straight out of college at Google, and then YouTube, and then Facebook. So it's fair to say, probably have quite perhaps a different view on the way that even business operates, having only really worked in my professional career for California tech-driven companies, which are sometimes seen as a bit of an otherworldly type of space. But really, I think because my constituents, the people that I'm working with across the Europe, Middle East, and Africa region, covering more than 100 countries, are all public sector representatives. Right from senators and heads of state all the way through to civil servants and public administrators and diplomats. It is quite interesting to watch this intersection come into play of the way that we as a business approach the work that we do, and trying to figure out, as these worlds come together, how to make something like Facebook operations work in some government offices, for example, which restrict use of the internet to employees or restrict it for security reasons in some ministries of defense or in some ministries of foreign affairs type offices. But really there's two things that I wanted to highlight from the get-go about the experience of watching innovation at a company like Facebook. And one of them comes from Chris Cox, who has been really one of the visionaries on our management team from the very beginning. I was fortunate enough to join Facebook in an era where Chris Cox did all of our new hire orientations, sitting on a floor because we didn't have any chairs in the room. And Chris would talk us through innovation strategy. And when we think about Facebook in the early days, it was never intended, for example, to be a photo sharing platform. That was never the intention. You were supposed to have one picture that symbolized you. This is Elizabeth Linder on Facebook. This is her picture. This is her background. And this is what she does. And of course, over time, people started to change their photos, their profile picture, that one space where you could have a picture multiple times. Where our earlier engineers were looking at this behavior and thinking, we never intended people to interact with their photos in this capacity. We expected this to be a one-time choice that stuck with you for a while. And that was the genesis of the photo sharing application on Facebook. And from the very early days, we have learned that we observe how people misuse our platform to understand how we need to innovate and how they want to use the platform. Changing your photo every day was actually a misuse of that profile picture space. That's not what it was intended for. That space was supposed to represent you. And we realized that people were crying for something different. And of course now, not only is Facebook the largest photo sharing platform in the world, but the recent Instagram acquisition goes to prove how much paying attention to the way that people want to use your products and services as a way to understand where you need to invest is actually quite important. Another element, I think, Facebook's mission has always been to help make the world more open and connected. And I know many companies have missions, but I do feel as though Facebook builds openness, transparency, and connectivity into everything we do. We've just finished our review cycle where I review my peers, I review my manager reviews me, the typical 360-degree review. And when you actually have finished your review, a little notification comes up and gives us the percentage of people who shared that feedback with the person they're reviewing last year and says, we can do better. Really encouraging you to say, don't fill this out anonymously. If you really have constructive feedback to deliver to your peers, deliver it and be brave enough as well to share that feedback with them. And actually I find, at first that seems a little bit uncomfortable, but watching the feedback roll in about me and understanding how it is that my colleagues, what have they chosen to point out? What have they chosen to talk about as feedback? That's actually incredibly useful. But it has to come with a business ethos of openness and transparency. All of that, of course, is underpinned by the company that we are in the first place. When you do work for Facebook, everything you do is on Facebook. We have a Facebook group for everything we do. There's a Facebook group for London that's just social. There's a Facebook group for London that's supposed to be more business. The elevators are down, or we need this conference room, or what have you. There's a Facebook group for every product that we're working on, every region that we work across. When we see an article that we need to share, when we have an idea, hey, has anybody heard of this? This is all done through Facebook groups. And of course, this is very, very much, to me, specific of the California internet industry. If you've heard the phrase, eat your own dog food. Google is very much a fan of that phrase. I remember from being a Googler that really using your own products is core to the industry. But I think in the case of Facebook, it produces a really quite interesting business environment, because what tends to happen is, of course, decisions are made very, very quickly and across multiple people, because this is all done in real time. And we've started to distinguish a bit, almost without laying down a law about it, but between an email and the use of the Facebook group. The email is essentially designed to say to one specific person or a small group of people, this is something we need to work on. Whereas if you are brainstorming or giving people heads up as a broader team or as a working group, we're putting that all in these open platforms, which essentially anybody can join. Now, of course, if you picture your own Facebook experience, for those of you who are on Facebook, imagine how these groups work at a company like ours, because every member of a group shows up in those group posts with their personal profile from their personal Facebook page, which means that occasionally I'll be having a very serious business conversation back and forth in comments on a group with a colleague whose profile picture is wearing a birthday hat from their kid's 7th birthday party. And it's that very strange environment to say, even though we're actually talking about the ITU, debate in Dubai, hashing out really serious policy issues, it's all taking place between my profile picture, which was taken at a Cambridge May ball. I was privileged enough to be my sister's date at that particular event, in a ball gown on one of these merry-go-rounds, and my colleague wearing his son's birthday hat. And that kind of, it doesn't always have to be silly, but it's personal, because there's something about those conversations that actually reflect the priorities in your life and who you are as a person. So within the company, having that experience of being Facebook friends with all of your colleagues, even though, of course, we do have privacy settings and people can use them, what I've noticed is at our company, there's a very high sensitivity to understanding each other as people, even more so than as colleagues. The first thing we'll do after a weekend is say, hey, those pictures looked amazing. What a great trip. And we don't even have to have talked about the fact that your colleague was going on a trip because it just passed through your news feed. Now, of course, in my perspective, working with government officials, I must admit that most of my strong work contacts at some point over the last few years have friended me on Facebook, which means that I have that same relationship with them as well. And even though this might be a bit unusual to have that much of a blend between personal and professional life, as we all do at Facebook, I find it immensely powerful that even though perhaps I have not passed through a country in about a year or 8 months, I'm still somewhat peripherally involved in the people's lives who I support in a professional capacity. So when my key contact with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Israel is posting pictures about that crazy snow day a while back, I'm actually commenting on his photos even though it has nothing to do with working with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in an official capacity. And I do think there's an incredible power in that coming together of worlds if used and seen well. So really, it is a matter, I would say, of, as a business, not just embracing the openness and transparency ethos because we're told that this is our company's mission, but because of the physical nature of the work, it just comes so naturally. And I brought in, actually, one of these little books that we were all given quite recently. When Facebook was going public, we were very cognizant of the fact of how much we were in the news as a company, how much all of a sudden everyone was talking about our numbers and figures as a business. And we were all reminded very strongly that Facebook actually isn't about being a company. There are posters in all of our conference rooms that remind us that we make essentially, our bottom line, our revenue stream comes to build better products and services. We're not building products and services to make money. And it's really, I think, something that comes into the play of a company where the mission and the values all enmesh so closely together. So we were reminded, actually, and we're still reminded many times, that although 1 out of 7 people in the world are on Facebook, which is over 1 billion people, 6 out of 7 people are not on Facebook. And that's what we're reminded. Even my little Oyster card says that we're 1% the way there, and we still have a very long way to go.
Okay, Elizabeth, thank you. Excellent, fascinating, and well, I shall have to look you up on Facebook after this session. Andy from Expedia.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things that, from your piece there that comes out to me is it's all about the individual and the consumer. The customer is the most important thing out of all of this, and understanding what they want and what they need. I've worked in an industry for 21 years that has predominantly got it wrong. The travel industry was dominated by tour operators that took a lot of flights, took a lot of hotels, and said to you, this is what we've got, you will buy this. But that doesn't listen to what the customer wanted. And I had a very short stint at one of those tour operators, Thomas Cook, a couple of years ago. And I only stayed there 5 months. And I'm sure you've all seen what happened to Thomas Cook. That wasn't down to me. Thomas Cook was still living in the past, and it wants to catch up. But is it going to be able to catch up with the noose around its neck of maybe its levels of debt, or being able to catch up in a digital age when it's way behind? The travel industry itself used to have 9,000 travel agents on the high street. It's got about 6,000 now. And the high street won't be dead for travel agents. But the internet and online has really taken over, and that's where the likes of Expedia have really won. We're not big, we're not brash around our brand name as such compared to the likes of TUI or Thomas Cook, but we are far bigger as a business because we listen to our customers, and that came through very clear. The Facebook interaction is all about that individual and that consumers and what they can share with you. And if you listen and understand what those customers want, then you can be very successful. And that's not just in data, which is very, very important to us, but it's actually listening and understanding their interactive behaviors. The travel industry, when it came online, started to build all their websites, and Expedia has been guilty of this in the past. There's a hotel tab, there's a flight tab, but that's because I had a technology feed for hotels or I had a technology feed for flights. But that's not how you shop. You don't shop by one marketing channel. You might go onto TripAdvisor, you will go onto Facebook, you will search via Google. You might even call a call center or go into a high street agent. You don't just do everything once all the time. Now, if I can understand that data and I can understand that consumer behavior, we then start to build our site and test that out that way. I'll build a page or we'll build a journey for our site listening to what the customer wants. But that's not the end of it. If I just do that and the conversion doesn't increase, then we've not really done anything positive. We continuously A/B test. We do about 120 A/B tests on our site every month. And the reason for that is because our site might be great today, but in 3 months' time, that will be out of date. There's so many new players able to come into this industry very, very quickly. And as consumer behavior changes, you've got to adapt and be adept to that. Data is also very, very critical. The Sun came out 2 weeks ago, and that's changed the dynamics of our industry overnight in terms of the demand. We talked earlier about Brighton. You couldn't get any rooms in Brighton on Saturday night, but you could in Bournemouth, and it was 183% up. Now, I knew that was going to happen because of my experience in the industry, but also knowing that the data, we look at the weather report in travel every day. If it's going to rain, people will want to go to Spain. If the sun's coming out, they'll stay local. It's as simple as that. But it's always listening to the customer, but having the product, having the price, having the availability of what they want, and again, fulfilling their demand and listening to them. And then that brings us on to where's the travel industry going? Well, yeah, there will be troubles on the high street. There's no doubt about that. But those agents that adapt and add a level of service and have a unique proposition, they will survive. Those that listen to their customers and look at the demand patterns online, they'll also thrive. But mobile and tablets come into play a lot recently. It's probably over the last 2 years that the number of searches for flights has gone up to about 25%, and the number of bookings to about 12%. Now, again, that's part of the consumer journey. It's not the be-all and end-all. Someone doesn't just search on a phone or on a tablet. It's quite often, I know I do it, and I'm sure many of you do. You'll be there at home at night, the TV will be on, you've got your laptop for work, but you might have a tablet open or your phone open doing something else, shopping. And that's the multi-device world we're now living in. And again, if you don't embrace that, then you're going to be left behind. One of the main challenges of that is that data hasn't caught up with that yet. We don't know fully who is on their mobile, who is on their tablet, who is on their laptop at the same time. What I can tell you is I know that people will do that, and that will continue to evolve, and that's where industry needs to make sure that it fulfills all that's consumers' needs and all of their demand.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Okay, and Tom, so a quick take from Facebook and Expedia. Give us the government angle on this.
Couldn't agree more about the radical change in context and expectation amongst what you would call customers and I would call a user or a citizen. That is a huge change, not in technology. Yeah, technology is just everything invented after you were 15. A lot of people are grown up. A lot of people are grown up now who can't remember a time before the internet was a core part of their lives, and before their expectations were set by the convenience and speed and empowerment commercially in terms of buying holidays, but also in terms of their expectations about their engagement with the state. Now, what's different about government is we don't have quite the kind of competitive context to go out of business like a Blockbuster would. But that is the very last reason to be complacent, because the difference between what someone growing up who can't remember a time before the internet, their expectation of their engagement with the state is one of simplicity, is one of clarity, and is one of speed. Simpler, clearer, faster. And the difference in expectation around simplicity of engagement, clarity of engagement, and speed of engagement between those who are growing up who can't remember a time before the internet and the current makeup and engagement and deliverability of the state is already slightly terrifyingly large and is growing faster all the time. That is a significant threat, both in terms of the government is missing out on a lot of efficiency savings. We should be saving something around £1.7 billion a year if we just take some of our biggest services and make them simpler, clearer and faster, and make them digital by default every year. But almost more importantly than the savings, it is the relationship between the citizen and the state. That democratic accountability and expectation is absolutely critical. What have we got to learn from industry? Almost everything. And I don't know how many of you are aware of the work that the Government Digital Service has been doing over the past 2.5 years. But in essence, it's been bringing the culture that Elizabeth and Andy have talked about, of being humble enough to know you'll get it wrong first time, of being acute in listening and watching to what people do with your service, not what they necessarily say they're going to do, but what they actually do with your service. Living in the data and changing and adapting your service really, really quickly. When we launched gov.uk, we launched an alpha in 12 weeks for £261,000. We then did 3 phases of a beta, all of which were public. We blogged all the way through, we tweeted all the way through. When we went live, the only thing we did was flip a switch and redirect the traffic from DirectGov, from BusinessLink to the big predecessors, to replacement pages on gov.uk. We had run 18 months of iteration and started small and iterated rapidly and listened all the way through. And we got some big things wrong, but we got them wrong quickly and cheaply. There's I think the difference for government is we are a legacy organisation. We were established, and in many ways we are still established in accordances with the capabilities, the technological capabilities of the 19th and early 20th century, which is fundamentally paper. The reason Whitehall is a small area is so you can carry files around between basements easily. Literally that deeply embedded. And you know, this radical change in culture to enable that ability to respond rapidly to changes in expectation, to changes in cost, in capability, the mobile thing, that requires an enormous fundamental cultural and capability change in the civil service, which I'm glad to say has been recognised in the Civil Service Reform Plan, which was published a year ago, which had digital running through it like a sticker rock. And you know, there are people here from Government Digital Service who are right now worrying about one thing and one thing only really, which is how does the government, the civil service as a whole, increase its digital capability? How do we make sure we've got the right people with the right experience and the right willingness to challenge and change to match the expectation of users out there and be humble enough to know you're going to get it wrong first time and iterate it. We've got people like Adam Bai here from the Foreign Office, who I noticed over there, who's living that vision and setting up a new unit. He's got jobs on offer at the moment, in fact, within the Foreign Office to drive that digital transformation.
And I'm friends with most of his staff on Facebook.
Yeah, they're all over Facebook. What I would say is the government has done some things really rather well over the years. And we mustn't forget those. I don't know if any of you have bought driving road tax online. One of our less bad services. I'm very tough. I won't call it good, it's less bad. But even there, where the service is relatively simple to buy your road tax online, you genuinely can do it in a couple of minutes. Even there, we're only getting 58% of people doing it online, when I believe the car insurance company now is upwards of 70% online. So you already, even with one of our better services, there's a significant gap between what people are already doing out there and what we're managing to deliver through the quality of services we offer on government digital services. So a fundamental transformation is happening in government right now to bring a culture of designing, developing, iterating digital services. It's not about websites, it's about end-to-end digital services based on expectations of users, driven by the data about what they do, not what they say they're going to do, iterating rapidly every day. We do 10 software releases a day on gov.uk. I have to say there are many government services that struggle for 2 a year. And to do so in alignment with what we call our design principles. And if you go to gov.uk/design principles, you'll see 10 principles that we adhere by in that transformation of government digital services that's happening right now. And they start, I won't go through them, I'll give you a couple. They start with focusing on the user need. What does the user need? Everything follows from that. And government's traditionally not great at that. We weren't set up to be like that. We have to be like that if we're going to stay relevant. A few others do less. Government should only do what only government can do. In this world, we've got to be clear about what we do and what we don't do. We've lost about 90% of pages on gov.uk in the transition. Barely anyone noticed. It tells us something. And finally, we're doing it open because it makes things better. If you go to the GDS blog, you'll see us blogging every day and tweeting every day about what we're doing, the mistakes we make, our successes, our failures, and our data. We publish our performance data on gov.uk/performance. You can see the traffic. On gov.uk you can see where we're performing well against what users expect. You can see the cost of our transactions, cost per transaction. This is what I would believe you can take the learnings of what digital culture does and bringing it to government. The challenge is taking a legacy organisation and turning it on its head, really, to put that digital culture right at the heart of redesigning how it delivers its services to meet expectations. So our analogues in many ways are the likes of British Airways, Thomas Cook if they'd have succeeded, Marks and Spencers, Barclays, the banks, where you have organisations that are decades old that were designed in a different era, where their culture is from a different era. The challenge is not working out what to do, that's pretty clear, although it's challenging for everybody. The challenge for the government is working out how to do it, how to transform to be a digital culture.
Yeah. Tom, thank you. Okay, so three fascinating perspectives on the topic. I'm going to open it now to questions from the floor. So who would like to ask the first question? I think this hand went up first. The microphone's on its way. If you could tell us your name and where you've come from as well, that would be super.
James Clark from the BBCA here. This is a question for Tom. Firstly, gov.uk is by far the best, not only government site that I've worked with, but also almost all of the commercial sites I've worked with. It's just, considering the complexity you have to deal with, what you've been able to achieve is completely remarkable. Going back to the point that was made, though, in terms of Expedia having feeds from, say, hotels and flights, how do you cope with trying to reduce that sort of complexity at a central level when the government is trying to devolve powers back to local councils, who, frankly, have some of the most complicated and hard-to-use sites and services are available?
Nice, easy one to kick us off.
That's a very, very good question, genuinely. Damn good question. That tension between, and it's a healthy tension between the democratic accountability that local authorities rightly have and should exercise, and what is done centrally under the national democratic accountability, is challenging for users. And it's challenging for users for a very simple reason, is that they don't know what local government does versus what central government does. And so what we have to do is not ignore the democratic accountability and say, oh, yeah, we'll do all the work, central government will do everything. Local government is important. Britain is different and diverse. It's a very important piece of our democratic makeup. What we have to do is make it easy for users to get to the right place when they do the right thing. So on gov.uk, lots of people come to gov.uk for council tax. Don't ask me why, but they think central government does council tax. What we do is we make it very easy and we manage our deep links right to the council tax payment page of 440-something local councils, so they get a simple user journey based on their location. Now, what I would say is there are 400 and something other local councils. They are all very different. Some of them have different challenges, many of them have similar challenges. There is a vanguard of local councils dotted around the country, the likes of Shropshire, the likes of Lambeth North, Lichfield, Warwickshire, where I think this digital culture, this digital approach that I'm talking about is really turning into something interesting as well, and a recognition that for local government services, and by volume of services, there are more services delivered locally than nationally, not by volume of use, that culture needs to change as much in local councils, and maybe they've got some benefits from learning from some of the design patterns that we've been using nationally. Let's call search the same thing across government. Let's not make people learn how to things work differently, for example. But it is a good, healthy tension, I think, and our job is to manage it for users so they can find their way through and to help support the same changing culture that central government is undergoing, to help support local councils undergo the same thing. Can
I just add a comment to that? If I look at Facebook, Expedia and the BBC, if I take the BBC in general, just for a moment, if I look at all their websites, one of the dangers of the internet is we've all been able to build more and more things onto an internet website, and then we bolt more things on. The beauty of tablet and mobile is you build for fat thumbs.
Yes.
And you make the whole thing a lot simpler, and you take it back step by step. I actually think the user journey on mobile and tablet is a lot easier on those three sites.
Well, we've gone mobile first with all our design. So we design first for mobile, and doing less is absolutely...
Yeah. So if you build for that responsive design with that user in mind again, then I think that's the way that the future will evolve more.
Half of e-petitions are done on mobile phones already. something like it's gone from 10% to 30% mobile usage on gov.uk in less than a year. You have to, and I couldn't agree more about the opportunity mobile gives to force your organisation to simplify its offer. It's fantastic. Have to do it.
Okay, so lady in the second row. Microphone's on its way.
I wanted to pick up where Tom left off on the key challenge of how, in terms of cultural change, back office change, because I think that the front end customer interface layer, for those, oftentimes it's the digitally savvy people within the organization that are leading that part of the initiative. And in order to successfully fulfill that front end user need, we need to sort out the back office, which necessitates cultural change as well as business change. So I was just interested in learnings from the panel on those.
I couldn't agree more. If you look at the sort of remit of GDS, why it was set up to do three things. One was fixed publishing. That was the first thing. That's really relatively easy, notwithstanding it's hard, but relatively easy. The second was fixed transactions. And that we're really at the heart of that now. That really kicked off with the publication of the government digital strategy and all the departmental digital strategies in the autumn of last year, where the government strategy here is we've got to learn how to undergo this business transformation. It's not about technology, it's fundamental business transformation. Let's do that by picking 25 big services and really transform those 25. We call them the exemplars, the digital exemplars. And they range from how we pay tax to how we engage with driving licenses to universal credit to big government initiatives. Let's use those to understand the kind of organisational change that's needed and the kind of new... I don't even want to talk about front office and back office anymore. What it takes to offer a seamless single digital service. But that's exactly, we're right at the heart of that debate now. We've done the easy stuff, and now it's about business transformation.
I find part of that is also cutting across the silos, because what you're doing requires laterally relevant change as opposed to silo contained change, which is one of the...
It's pretty existential, some of the changes needed.
Yeah. I think in our experience, actually, most of the governments that I work with have the experience of the vast majority of employees maybe not using these kinds of services as part of their day-to-day job and learning how, as you're describing. What's been interesting at Facebook is I remember the transition about maybe 3 years ago when we first started hiring people that were not actively on Facebook when we brought them into the company. So you can picture a startup environment that's going to be everybody there, is going to be a young college graduate. Then you have the wave of people like me who are brought in from companies like Google and YouTube, very, very closely related companies to the industry. And then you bring in the wave, for example, on our public policy team, you need senior public policy experts who are not necessarily, growing up with Facebook, who haven't been using it for the last, couple of years of their lives actively. And it's been interesting for me to watch and observe how quickly those executives adapt to the environment. And I think there again, it's the fact that if it works, it's so obvious that it works that you're not even having to describe, why this is so. The minute they start entering into these groups, realize how quickly decisions are made, how quickly feedback is given, how quickly information is shared. The pace of all of this, and I think many government organizations can understand as well fast change. If you're in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on a day where something's going on in Syria, you're working really fast to make decisions that have to cut across all levels of any organization. So the more people who are visible to those decisions as they play out, or have visibility into those decisions, the faster they're going to be able to understand the message, understand the narrative, and go out and deploy what it is that they're doing. And I've noticed actually that as quite senior executives who come from industries or experience that are not used to that quick real time, that are more used to the conventional email chain with the hierarchy where it's just the executive team and then they start looping in the managers and then everybody else is informed. At first I can tell there's a bit of a feeling of, is this actually going to work? And then there's that realization that the more open and inclusive, the faster we can all execute against the mission as it changes. And when we're making a user operations decision, let's say a piece of content has been reported to us at a very high level that sits right on the margin of whether we would take that up or take it down. We've got all of the press calling in. You know, we've got a user who's potentially in danger or not. We're not sure where they are. We don't know where they live. We're trying to track down all of this information at once. These are decisions that are going to involve public policy, the legal team. You know, sometimes maybe they involve an ads person because a photo or an image was involved in some kind of sales campaign. You know, you've got your PR guys hopping on that thread, and then sometimes, you know, Mark or Cheryl, depending on who's all involved. And the fact that all of these people are watching this play out in that kind of group environment, I think is massively beneficial. And it's interesting to watch my colleagues who didn't grow up with, you know, with Facebook as part of their college experience adapt so quickly. You know, where they start out with one profile picture and then they maybe add a picture of their children or something, and then boom, they're just right in. They're using it within a month for business.
Yeah, I think if you look at, and I know you don't like to call it front-end or back-end systems, but if you think about your house, you can decorate your bedroom as many times as you want, but can you structurally change the walls all the time? No, that's the cost. That's the big capital investment. It's actually interesting, the Yo group are starting to launch houses where you can move the walls around. And that's adapting for things like that. I'm not sure whether it will take off. But if you don't get your back-end systems right in the first place, that's where the likes of the legacy groups in travel have got their problems.
Yeah. Okay, let's take some more questions. So why don't we take a couple at a time? The two gentlemen in the front row have had their hands up. So if you could just tell us your name and where you're from, and I'll take two.
Hi, I'm Deep Sagar. I'm a management consultant. If I can just make a comment on the Gov.uk progress. What seems to me is that Gov.uk sees the internet as a shopping mall as opposed to a high street, which to my mind it might be better seen as. What I mean by that is putting everything together under one umbrella might be good for savings and consistency. But a consumer doesn't wake up in the morning thinking government or non-government. They wake up in the morning thinking services, if they think of anything at all. So I think leveraging that particular high street aspect of the internet might have better scope for getting more out of monopoly services.
Okay, thank you. So hold that thought, and then we'll take another question from the gentleman here.
It's Craig Nelson from ISPA. So Tom, I was wondering that when you, obviously as a GDS representative, you are kind of on the cutting edge of making government digital by default. But what impact or what kind of say does the GDS have to policymakers and to ministers when they come up with ideas that, well, will severely harm or affect the internet industry?
Okay, so one question about is Gov.uk a mall or a high street? And I guess a question upper level about the role of GDS in government policy.
Yeah. So in response to your question, good question. We did not design Gov.uk to be a singular, holistic, closed destination. In fact, we expected and we have had about 7% of people ever seeing our homepage. The place journeys start on gov.uk is typically either in social media or on a search engine. And the real effort we put into it, and most of the intellectual effort, as with any commercial site now, is about your landing page strategy. What's the place that the user lands, and do they understand where they are? Do they contextually know what they've got to do next if they've landed in the right place? And critically, in a still a search-driven world, most of our traffic still from search, do we optimise for what people actually search for in the UK? 90% of people use Google. So we expect, we have a little phrase saying Google is the homepage. For gov.uk, people start on Google. And to give you an example of the way we're thinking, the official name for car tax is vehicle license something. I can't remember what it is. Nothing humanly understandable. So legally, that's what it's called. Okay. We do put that on our page, but we also put car tax because when people go to Google, they'll type in car tax,
Right.
and they make sure they land on that page and the journey is smooth. If we had built a hermetically sealed, there's only one way in and you're trapped within it, I'd agree with you. We didn't. We turned it inside out. We did what commercial companies do. We optimised for landing pages, and we made sure that people could find the services, and they want to go directly to the services. They don't go anywhere near a homepage, directly to the service they need. What happens thereafter is where the key challenges around digital transformation. Those services are often not as good as the best. In terms of GDS's role and wider digital issues in government, government's a big place with many competing pressures. I just repeat what I said earlier about our primary focus right now is getting digital capability into government. That's not just about service transformation, that's more broadly around making sure that when policy is set, it is informed correctly by the realities of a digital world, in balance with the realities of a world that is not always as internet friendly as we'd ideally want it to be. And what I would say, there's a wide range of fantastically very clueful digital people, Adam's one of them, all across government. It's not just about GDS, and it predated GDS by many, many, many years. I think what GDS has done is amplify the volume of some of those people. Maybe not as much as some of you would like, but I think the volume of the digital voice in government is only getting louder and will continue to do so.
Okay. Should we take another couple of questions? So actually, well, there's two ladies back there who've had their hands up.
Hello, I'm Georgina Pattinson from the BBC. Elizabeth, you mentioned something earlier. You learned from your customers by the way they misused what you were putting up. And Tom, you mentioned that you'd listened to customers, you'd blogged and tweeted right the way through your launch. So my question is really, how do you listen to your customers? What are the most valuable tools that you have? And what do you learn from them?
Okay, great question. So hold that thought, and then let's take the lady in the row in front.
Danielle Whitehurst from Management Consultancy. The changes are going to take resource and skills, so innovation, all that, the digital technology skills. Do you think the UK has the right base for that at the moment, and what investment do you think is required?
Okay, so great question, and I think it'd be interesting to hear from all the panelists on this. So first up, how do you listen to customers or users or citizens or whatever we're going to call them? Second, about the resourcing challenge here, and is the UK equipped for this? So who would like to go first?
Well, in terms of listening to users, the advantage, I suppose, of talking about the digital side of the work that all three of us do is that the measurement, the capability to measure is massive. When we do very slow product rollouts, one of the reasons for that, of course, is that with 1 billion people, you can't risk breaking something by turning the switch all at once. But another massive benefit of that is that as people are starting to use and interact with new products, we're able to see what their kinds of interactions with those services are, so that we're actually already tweaking. You used the word, Tom, iterating a number of times. I'd say iterating is almost overused at Facebook. We're already starting to work on how we're going to change that before the entire world has even experienced that new product. So I would say the measurement, anything that's available on a site like Facebook, how many people are actually using as graph search rolls out? How many people are leveraging that? What kinds of searches are they doing? Where are they clicking through? All of that is measurable on a platform. And it's quite easy to understand over time whether something has been quickly learned and people have adjusted quickly, or if it takes a little bit of time to walk them through. Which is where we will do a massive amount of testing before any of this to go through those little educational flows that you see sometimes. When Facebook makes a major product change, you'll sign on one day and it will say, "Hi, Elizabeth, check out your new this here and your new that there." We used to not do that so much, but now with the scale that we're operating against and the fact that we do sometimes move around people's furniture and walls without asking them, means that we actually now go through these processes of introducing people to the new format. I would say, though, the testing team and the teams that look at these numbers is massive, and I'm not really closely tied to that team. But what I have really learned from them, and certainly heard directly a number of times from Mark, who's very interested in these topics, is looking at where that line is between people adapting to something that's new, that they will begin to embrace because it fits with a bigger picture of the way the world is going, versus pushing people a little bit too far, where then you get the resistance. Finding where that line sits even for a company like Facebook with all the numbers we have, with 1 billion people connected to us, is a very, very difficult thing. And we certainly don't underestimate that. I think the biggest advantage you can have in that space is a willingness to start over again, a willingness to, to move on from an idea that's not working, to apologize, and to not worry too much about mistakes. Employees at Facebook will be accustomed to working on one thing another day, showing up the next day, oh, you know what, this is not working, we're going this direction instead. That constant changeability is a nature of being a technology company that's going to succeed over the long term, because you have to make those bold decisions to understand where people are going. I look now at, at the use of Instagram, whether it's here through the British monarchy and then Clarence House, as we all anticipate the news, whether it's Sheikh Mohammed and all of his kids who are using Instagram, as they go about their various state duties or personal duties. My constituents are using it so actively that I think back, to that decision that our management team had to make about whether or not to acquire this company. Is this the way the world is going? And the numbers are showing that, but you have to make those decisions and put a stake in the ground, and then just start veering from there. And I would say from the inside, the last 5 years at a company like Facebook, the quick turns that we will make. This is not a company that will make a decision and say, well, now that we've made the decision, we have to stick to it. If we make a decision and people are not reacting in the way we expected them to react, we will pay attention. Doesn't always mean that we'll go back to where we started, but we will, we will make decisions based on that feedback.
Yeah, I think I couldn't argue against any of that. A/B testing, MVT testing, all those sorts of things are great. One of the things you have to be very careful about that, though, is if you've got 10 different tests going live in one day, is which one of those really actually swung the needle. And you might turn one off and you've got 9 successful ones and you add another 5 in, but 2 of those 9 successful ones then suddenly drop off, and it's which ingredients work well together. And that's why you continuously have that test and learn environment throughout your organization. I think at Expedia, we also make sure we talk to our customers. It's one of those brand marketing strap lines. We say we're powered by people who travel. People shape travel. And that's not just a strap line, though. We live and breathe that. Everyone loves to travel. That makes half of my job easy. But the people we employ, the people we work with, love to travel. If you listen to them, they're already your consumers, but you need to talk to them face to face. You need to listen to those consumer surveys as well as look into all the data and all the user behavior.
Yeah, I would just add a couple of things to that. I think the design with data, not intuition. That's an Amazon saying, but very, very skeptical of intuition. Where experience does matter is when you're trying to separate insight in a sea of data. There's a good example there with A/B testing, where you in there somewhere is an insight and you've probably got too much data to quickly get at the insight, and experience definitely matters there. Listening actively to where people are unhappy with what you're doing. And good thing about government is this is genuinely a good thing about government. People are happy to moan about the government. Quite happy to moan about the government, and through social media and and all sorts of other channels. So we invest a lot in our internal systems, a bit like Facebook, at capturing all the data we can, be it qualitative data that people have sent us. This isn't working, kind of data. Quantitative data about this many people are coming. This is the bounce rate. This is the conversion rate, etc. And all sorts of other data sets about performance and speed of the service. Into a thing we call the Needatron. Silly name, developers. And the Needatron is really a receptacle of what we think there are about 1,500 user needs now that gov.uk meets. For each one of those, we have a place where we look at the dashboard of how we think that individual need is being met, which includes what people are saying on Twitter, or not as much as what people are saying on Facebook because it's a closed environment. Just like get that in there. We'd love to learn more about what people do on Facebook, but it's often quite hard to get to. And we adapt our service accordingly. I just throw some tools that we found really, really useful. When we did the alpha and the beta, we used Get Satisfaction, which is a commercial service. Cost me $49 on my credit card. I never bothered claiming it back. It was the best $49 I ever spent. It's a fantastic commercial third-party service for capturing and collating user feedback when you're running an alpha or a beta. I have no shares. Shall I quickly go on the skills thing?
Yeah, please do.
Skills question. be here somewhere. They can't change the ICT curriculum quickly enough. Would be my one overriding thought. More positively, we have some fantastic digital talent in the UK. And the Tech City initiative that the government's been leading has really highlighted quite how much talent we have in this space. From a personal perspective, it's often been, until relatively recently, been focused far too much on the advertising industry, broadly scoped, not necessarily the digital advertising industry, rather than service design. And people who are interested in service design have too often gone off to the States. They're typically nicked by some of the big US companies and really talented individuals. And one of the challenges that we certainly set ourselves in GDS is stopping people leaving for the States. And everything, I've lost some people to Berlin, I'm less worried about that. I really don't like losing people to the States. And keeping that, it is a talent business, but we have got the talent, we're still getting the talent. I'd love a load more coming out of schools, universities, design, computer science, analytics, user research. We're getting some fantastic people. Getting them focused on really important stuff, not saying advertising is not important, but, well, I am actually, not that important compared to transforming government services, and keeping them in the UK is often the challenge.
Mm-hmm. We talk about the pace of evolution in commerce and retailing. I agree with you. Can the schools and can all those policies keep up with that rate of pace and rate of change? My daughter's in her second year at school. She learned to use a mouse last year. That's obsolete now for her. She's on the iPad all the time. My 18-month-old daughter is constantly getting hold of our iPad. Swipes, off she goes. That scares me. But that's the sort of environment they're going to grow up with. Mine was a ZX Spectrum, but they wouldn't even know what a cassette is nowadays. Yeah, I do think we have a lot of talent in this country. We're very proud at Expedia within the last 12 months that Expedia has 2 global leaders of different parts of its business now based in London. And it didn't have that for a very long time. We were born out of Microsoft 15 years ago. It was very US-centric business. It's now a global business, but with 2 leaders in London. We recently had a small reorg within our teams. And someone said to me, will that part of the organisation work now? But actually, I look at the individuals we have and the skill sets we have, and you could take away their job titles, you could take away the structure of the business, the quality of people that we have, and the potential out there in the marketplace as well, with other people coming in, multicultural, multi-diverse business that we have. The talent is out there, and you don't necessarily need to say that's your structure, that's your title. I'm confident we've got the right people in this marketplace.
Yeah, we've seen as well, London is a massive advantage to this. Facebook just last year started hiring engineers here into our London office. It used to be primarily a sales, marketing, public policy office. As of last year, brought over a landing team from the States, which essentially comes over to offices, hires in a team of engineers, gets everybody up to speed on the culture and the coding and all of this. And it's been, 2 things have really struck me about this. One, every once in a while, I walk in the office and think perhaps I'm in the wrong place because I'm surrounded by, Russians making coffee and speaking in Russian. I'll think, wait, what's going on? Because we do have, it's a very international community of engineers here, and London attracts that. If you are giving an engineer, Facebook and, all of these companies are competing for the best. Selling them on London is a place that internationally you can get people to come to this city. And we've noticed, especially in countries, California is a great place, but California is also quite a ways away from people's, families and home environments if that's not the kind of move you want to make. So I think we've certainly found London to be very advantageous for the talent pool. And the culture of the office has changed dramatically since becoming, I feel almost more comfortable now in Facebook London because it does remind me much more of the Mountain View Palo alto experience. It's an engineering company, it's a tech-driven company. One of our VPs of public policy said a long time ago.
That was designed by a Brit. So.
Yeah. One of our VPs, made the comment a very long time ago that for all of you who are interested in joining the communications and public policy team, just know one thing before you get involved. At this team at that time, this was at Google, and he said, we lost this empire a long time ago. This is not your world. This is the engineer's world. And you have to know that when you come into this business. And the exact same ethos exists at Facebook. It's an engineer's world. It's a tech company. It's a data-driven company. Now, what I like about the opportunity to connect that to the broader world, to government, is that to me brings in so much more of a holistic view of the impact that Facebook has. But even when you're coming and going, from a coffee machine or from the restrooms, you have practice coding materials on the wall, so you're just constantly practicing wherever you are. It's been too long since I've taken computer science to read them, but you do really feel that that spirit and that culture has changed. You're not losing 1 minute of your time. If you're making coffee, that's great, but you better be checking out what's on the wall so that you're not getting behind.
Okay. I think the gentleman in the front row had a question.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Henry Warren. I'm a consultant. Thanks very much for today. It's been really interesting. Going back to your original point around Kodak and Blockbuster, I don't think they failed because they were stupid. I don't think they failed because they had their fingers in their ears. I think they failed because they weren't able to turn their business model to be able to recreate themselves for the modern age. So my question to you guys really is, what are you doing to destroy your own companies and create the next generation?
Great question. So hold that thought, and then Sarah down the back.
My name's Sarah, I'm from Policy Exchange. This may have been touched on a bit, but one of the reasons Expedia and Facebook are so successful is because they can offer people compelling content and cost savings and new products. How does government do the same to get citizens accessing public services online when filling out a form for government isn't as exciting as looking at photos on Facebook?
Good question. Okay, so we'll start with what are you doing to destroy your own businesses?
I have it maybe a bit easier because I did mention Instagram briefly earlier, and that in our recent, about a month ago, I would say, our team had our annual offsite in California, and we spent quite a bit of time with the Instagram guys talking to them. And one of the questions that has come up with Instagram is Instagram basically cannibalizing Facebook photos because it is so incredibly popular. And so many young people especially just, this is how they're sharing information. But I would say the company's perspective on this really has been more along what you've been describing. You have to actually, get sometimes the core of your own business in order to steer and drive what's next. And in this case, the relationship of sharing between platforms is so strong that at the end of the day, most Facebook or most Instagram news feeds are going to feed back into the Facebook one at any rate. And there's going to be that strong connection there. The Instagram, the introduction of video as well has been interesting because that's an area where we really haven't had a strong presence in the video side. And Instagram video just, the day it launched, it just started to skyrocket, and already I'm seeing my government constituents start to play around with it, use it. If any of you saw the Michelle Obama videos that she did on Instagram with her South Africa trip, really compelling content actually to think about because they're so short and they're so easy and it fits right on that platform in terms of the impact you can make. I would also cite, mobile. A couple of years ago, obviously, Facebook did have its mobile products, but today it's a mobile-first company, 100%. And for a while, I actually sat behind the mobile guys here in London. I sort of missed them because hearing their conversations about the issues that they're thinking about and the challenges, we had to adapt pretty darn quickly because we were under such intense scrutiny from the press. And all of our revenue numbers, the big question was, can Facebook make money off mobile? And the numbers now are quite clear. This is actually something that introducing ads into the newsfeed has been critical. Now, how do you work with businesses to ensure that those ads are relevant and interesting to people? And that's, of course, a challenge, but it's one that we're seeing progress on. So I do think you're right. I think that in a way you almost have to look in at your own company. I would also say, not to sound too much like a capitalist here, but competition really is good. And what's interesting is even though government perhaps doesn't have the same element of competition that a business does, What I notice with my constituents is, as the conversation becomes global, there's a conversation between governments about how well they're doing. And one of the first questions a government representative in any given country will ask me is, so have you talked to the Germans lately? Yeah, so what are the Dutch doing? And there's that curiosity as to where are these guys on the spectrum? You know, I came back from Estonia riveted by the work that they're doing in tech, only to find out that they have some guys that have been planted within the UK government to help train them, because they were able to completely leapfrog technology. They're not shackled by the kinds of technology that our governments in the US and UK are. You know, they're able to just go straight into, into the 21st century. So I think that there is a certain element of governments talking to each other because this conversation is global. And the more you have these international open government, fora that make these certain promises to people and have to deliver against them, the more you get. The one question as well about content being interesting, of course, this is a huge part of any training or workshop that I'll be sorting through with government representatives, because it really is a pain point. And I think one of the key elements here is filling out a form might not be fun, but if it's useful and gets you the exact kind of information you need, or delivers the exact service you need it to deliver, as long as it's useful, it's a fine experience. People might not have a great time doing it, but it still is something that works for them. And this is what we talk about all the time in terms of Facebook. If the Foreign Office is posting videos about how to fill out a visa application form. Catherine, I think when you were here in the UK, were filling out those visa application forms or what have you with these videos that are so easy to understand and so well done, and they're in this medium that just comes naturally to you, then you're going to actually have a quite good experience going through that process. So I think it's a matter of saying, does social media always have to be interesting, or does it also serve a purpose in government if it's useful? And I think there's a lot to be said for hitting that latter piece and doing it well.
To the two questions. So for the first one, I like to think actually we're on a good path and a good roadmap at Expedia, that we're not going to be killing ourselves, and we're thinking so far ahead and making things adaptive so that if the world changes, we can move with that. If I thought about the industry of travel wider, I'd actually say two of the biggest threats, or actually the biggest threat, is around the monetization by government of the industry itself. So air passenger duty, atoll reform, none of that goes back to our original conversations of solving for the consumer. None of that had the consumer in mind. It was all about making money and filling gaps in pockets. So that actually, I think, is a risk to the industry and to inbound and outbound travel, and that's something we all need to really think about. When it comes down to those content elements, is filling out a form exciting? No, but it is practical and it saves time. And very much to consumers in London and the Southeast, they talk about being cash rich, time poor. You save any time, that's money in your pocket to yourselves. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that practical elements, you get a sense of satisfaction by saving time.
Mm. I think as part of the transition to gov.uk, we had a vision which is simpler, clearer, faster. Mm-hmm. And the notion that the government should set out as a primary purpose to create entertaining content is terrifying. And fortunately, it didn't succeed. But making sure our services are simple, clear and fast, and surprisingly useful, surprisingly easy to use, is actually at the core of our marketing strategy for gov.uk. We haven't done any traditional web-of-line marketing for gov.uk. Partly because we made sure we redirected every single URL on legacy sites to the right place, so people didn't need to know there'd been a change, but also because word of mouth is so powerful in this medium. And our strategy around marketing really is that the product is the service, is the marketing. If we can get people, if we can create a product that drives a really simple, clear, fast service and surprises people about how quick and easy it was, they will tell their friends and family, oh, I had read you, we should do that online. And in terms of driving digital adoption, that is going to be by far the biggest success. So we have to drive quality products to drive our reach and our marketing, rather than relying on TV adverts doing traditional.
Okay, I'm going to take 2 more questions and then we're probably up against time. So, gentleman in the front had his hand up for a while. Down here.
David Abrahams from Nominet. I was really struck by what Elizabeth was saying about how Facebook use group discussions to reach decisions quickly. Because from my experience of working in the public sector, the more people you get involved in a decision, the slower the decision goes. And in actual fact, when I was a public servant, when the decision wasn't going the way I wanted it to go, the best way to slow it down was to get more people involved in it. So I'm interested in 2 things. One, does that actually happen as there's one person with authority at the top of the discussion and they just get the inputs quicker? Mm-hmm. Or is it genuinely a more democratic process? Mm-hmm. And 2, over to Tom, does GDS work in that sort of way? Mm-hmm. Having created a bit of a new organisation and doing it in that way? Or do you find that you still end up in the classic civil service kind of decision-making problems?
Okay, so great question. Hold that thought. And then the lady in the green top.
Thank you, Androna Cole from Westminster North Conservatives. Elizabeth, you mentioned earlier about the Facebook profile photo and how that's evolved over time. I just want to ask each member of the panel if they think images and also video are taking over from text in social media.
Okay, great question to end us on. So reflections on those points, and since we're coming to the end, any other words of wisdom that you'd like to impart, most welcome. Start with Elizabeth.
Sure. I'll start with your question and work through. The images is, I think, absolutely fascinating. When I look at the use of the kinds of little stickers, if you've seen those on Facebook that we've just started launching, and the emoticons and the various kinds of imagery that people are using, even my quite, I would say more staid government contacts starting to use these in their correspondence, it does spark the question in my mind that have we somewhat underestimated the power of the image as human beings. Much of what Facebook is about is getting to the core of what humans are, about connecting and talking to other people. So we think about those kinds of issues quite a bit. And it actually was one of the, one of the Instagram guys who talked a bit about the hieroglyphic and the pictographic, cultures that largely, that predated cultures, using the letter scripts that we know today. What is it about people so embracing these images? Is it about speed, or is it about adding a bit more nuance to what it is that you're trying to say to your words? I think those are fascinating questions, and what I love is the fact that you've got teams of people in California thinking about them, really wondering on a deep, philosophical human level, what does it mean to interact with the word versus interact with the picture, with the photo. I do think in terms of something like Instagram, there's an incredible power to me in seeing a politician or a government official who's willing to embrace the video and the image. It brings so much context to who they are. Just yesterday, the president of the European Council, Herman Van Rompuy, posted a answer to a question that was delivered to him online while he was getting on a plane and sitting down in his little flight. And you're kind of watching him and suddenly realizing, wow, this is his life. It's hopping between these different countries, very familiar to those of us who cover big regions. But also, the modesty of the plane. He's cramped there beside this little window. Not much of his flight experience is different from mine. And that just gets your mind thinking in so many different contexts. All of a sudden, to me, Herman Van Rompuy, who I have not met personally, only his staff, came to life. And it came to life because this video just passed through my news feed, and there's no politician or government official that I don't like on Facebook, which has gotten me into trouble in some countries where neo-Nazis are still present. So beware. I've had a panicked phone call once or twice from the Germans. Elizabeth, what are you doing? So it really is interesting to see, I think, this kind of shift in the way that image is part of our culture, both serious and fun. And that's the spectrum that politicians are grappling with. Where do you fall along that line of serious and fun? I think in terms of the decision making, yes, I think decision making can be a terrible disaster if it involves, you know, every voice because everybody has an opinion. What I mean by coming to these decisions is more along the lines of when you have somebody that doesn't have enough visibility into the kinds of information we need to make a decision. So at a company like Facebook, for example, if one of you were to say to me after this panel, Elizabeth, why did Facebook take down this piece of content I had posted on a page? I wouldn't be able to go back to my desk and use my internal tools to find that out for you. I have to go to a user operations representative who's able to go into those tools. Yeah, okay, you know, that was taken down for hate speech, etc. You know, as individual employees, we have different spheres that we can see when we're making decisions that have impact. So from what I see in terms of the group environment, being able to bring all these voices together. Why did we take that content down? That was me. I took it down yesterday for hate speech. Somebody else, you know, get somebody from user operations Arabic involved. We have to get another opinion on this. All of those people are entering in at the same time, and those threads within 5 minutes usually get resolved across different people in different industries. And to me, that does work a bit different than the kind of add people to an email thread culture, because the email thread starts getting out of control. By the time you've read the previous email, the next email is in. Whereas on Facebook, that stuff is just appearing. So it's as though you're in a conference room and someone say, nope, I got it. 10 people like this, boom, we're done. And that's the kind of environment that we see happening when we're making decisions. That's the context around it.
Images versus written content in travel, it's a different answer for different people. You touched on having car tax written on the page earlier. If you put an image of a tax disc on there, would it really do anything for anyone? Probably not. If it was a beach holiday, you've got a nice image, that improves conversion. If it's booking a hotel on a mobile app within 24 hours, you're looking for the best price. So different for whether it's sideways traffic, different landing pages, and different users. And in terms of the decision-making process, yeah, I hate decision by committee. We've got a very lean structure at Expedia, so that helps that. But at the same time, you've got to empower your people. We've got good quality people, so let them make decisions. And we try to encourage them. You learn from your mistakes. We probably get more from some of those. Not everything's going to go right. But we ask people to ask for forgiveness, not for permission.
I'll be brief. Similarly, we a lot of the issues about a lot of the problems with design by committee is in a very hierarchical organisation. It is the way towards insanity, because you end up going up and down the chain rather than having a horizontal view. And one of the things we've done in GDS is just flatten the structure and the hierarchy virtually to not quite nothing, but as close as the civil service is ever likely to get to nothing, with an explicit desire to encourage those horizontal conversations and not have this up the chain and then down a different bit of the chain. That notwithstanding, we are in the civil service. And actually the most important people in GDS are not sort of quasi-geeks like me. It's the proper civil service. Not that I'm not a proper civil service, but the people who know how the whole civil service works, know how to navigate it successfully and respectfully in accordance with the civil service values, and make sure we don't get caught up in some of those dynamics. Having said that again, this is a change that's going on across the whole of the civil service. So we have a digital leaders group, which has typically people at board level in each department to do the necessary thing in an organisation as hierarchical as the civil service, which is sometimes you have to go top down. And we do use that route rather more frequently than sometimes we'd like to, but we have to have that route. In terms of images, thank you for talking about the car tax thing. I think having a picture of an orange car on your car tax is great. But not necessarily going to get you to where you want to go. In fact, we've just taken off the icons that we used across Gov.uk. We had different icons for different kinds of content to try and help people orientate. And in our user testing, people didn't have a clue what they were. So we had a brilliant designer who invested, really talented designer, one of the best I've ever worked with, who invested hugely in them. And he wrote the blog post. And in fact, he wrote the CSS that took them down. And his payoff on the blog post was like, at least I had the chance of deleting them as well. That notwithstanding, the one I totally agree about government figures blogging and using images to sort of get a much closer relationship. The one area where we are looking closely on Gov.uk is the use of video. And the reason video is really interesting is because there are a lot of people out there who can't read and who we need to explain sometimes relatively complicated stuff they need to do to them in a way they'll understand. But also there's a generation growing up for whom the primary means of learning, I've got 2 of them at home, is actually now video. And my son has learnt more from YouTube than any written word he's ever read. And we've got to be cognizant of the power of video to help people understand how to engage with the state. Problems with that, it's expensive and hard to do well, and there's nothing worse than a bad video. And it's expensive to change if you need to change quickly, and often government policy changes quickly. Yeah. So we're looking at animation as maybe a Zoom tool.
Okay, excellent. Look, I'm afraid we are up against time. I mean, this discussion could go on all afternoon, but there we are. Look, I found it absolutely fascinating. I've really enjoyed hearing from all of you. I mentioned earlier that this was part of a programme of work we're doing here on modernising government. There'll be a report later on this summer, so watch out for that. We'll try to make sure that you all receive a link to that when it's done, and hopefully you'll be able to join us here in the autumn to discuss that when it's out. So all that's left for me to do now is to thank the supporters for this programme, which is EE, Intuit, Microsoft and SAS, and to thank the panel for joining us today, Andy, Elizabeth and Tom. Thank you.